Um, Warren Packard has over 25 years experience in executive management, venture capital, entrepreneurship, as well as hands-on product design and engineering. Warren is an inventor and author of over a dozen patents encompassing innovations in video, data science, personalization, and medical devices. He was most recently the founder and CEO of ThuSport, a company revolutionizing the global sports industry through its platforms, enabling personalized sports highlight reels and real-time sports excitement ratings and fan alerts. ThuSports was acquired by Chicago-based Stats Perform in November of 2020. Prior to running Thus, Warren was a managing director at the Silicon Valley venture firm Draper Fisher Jurvetson. They focused on early stage and growth technology investments worldwide. During his tenure at DFJ, the firm was the principal investor in many multi-billion-dollar companies, including Tesla, SpaceX, Box, Skype, Baidu, and Hotmail. Warren personally spearheaded investments in over 24 companies and realized 18 exits through IPO and acquisitions, IPO being the early stage money. Warren has a Bachelor of Science, Master of Science, and MBA from Stanford University. He currently lives in Palo Alto, California with his wife and 4 children. And he forced me to say that he is forever proud to call Donald and Gwen Packard his parents. And I am equally proud to call Warren my son. Please welcome Warren Packard, whose topic is Update from Silicon Valley, a brief, intriguing look at the new technologies being pursued by today's startups. Warren?
Thank you, Donald. Can everybody hear me? I suspect that's the case. Great. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm delighted that I was invited to talk, and I'm looking forward to my presentation and, moreover, your questions. So I'll jump right in right now. This is an update from Silicon Valley from some sense because I live in Palo Alto, California, but really it's a talk about technology very broadly, not just about Silicon Valley. And the reason for throwing in the Silicon Valley is that there is a bit of a mystique about technology emanating from Silicon Valley, but really it emanates from all over the world. And that's one of the great achievements of technology is in evening the playing field and allowing individuals and entrepreneurs and technology companies to launch and sprout from anywhere across the globe. So I've changed the title of my talk to The Past, Present, and Future of Technology. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the technology present, and it's a great place to start. And as we dive in, I'll start with a quote from Danny Hillis. He said, "Technology is everything that doesn't work yet." And I think it's a really appropriate quote because when technology is first adopted or embraced or launched, I should say, it always has flaws. It's never perfect. And it is a bit bothersome and intrusive, but it's also very intriguing. And ultimately, it gets perfected over time and it becomes part of our lives and it just simply works. And at that point in time, we don't even call it technology anymore. We call it the typewriter or the telephone or the television or the automobile or whatever that might be. And it's no longer technology. And so if you look at the past, there's a bunch of technologies that have had profound influence on us, and we'll do it in just a moment. And we don't even think of them as technologies anymore. But as I go through this dialogue, you'll see that as we talk about technologies of the future, there are a lot of questions about those technologies, about what they can do and what good they'll bring to the world. But they're uncertain and they don't work yet. And that's the nature of technology. So starting with today, what I'd like to do is just look at the largest companies in the world by market cap. This is the value of these companies, and it might be a little bit small, but the point isn't the numbers that are there, but the companies that are listed. These are the top 10 largest companies by value: Apple, Microsoft, Google. Well, we've got Saudi Aramco, so there's an oil company in there. Then Amazon, Tesla, Facebook, NVIDIA, Berkshire Hathaway, an investment company, and finally, market cap companies as of today. 8 of the top 10 are technology companies. Or in the words of Danny Hillis, perhaps 8 of the top 10 are just companies because their technologies work, or most of the time they work. But the reason I start with these companies, and I'm just going to pull out these 8, is because where we were just a mere 50 years ago, none of these companies were on this list. None of these companies were even companies we thought about. And the question really is, how did they get to where they are today? And that's where we jump into the past and we take a look at a little bit of history to set ourselves up for talking about the future. One of the first elements of technology is compute, or the computer. And in fact, I'm going to go through 5 different main categories of technology fairly briefly, but these will lead us to talk about the future. But this first category is compute. And when I talk about compute, that's the computer and the chips that are inside them. And 3 of these 8 companies, Apple, NVIDIA, and TSMC, all grew into the companies they are because of what they did from the perspective of compute. Apple, of course, makes computers and cell phones. NVIDIA makes chips that go into these computers, and TSMC makes chips that go into these computers and just about every other device that we have in front of us. So all 3 of these companies became 3 of the top 10 because of what they did in compute. The second category is storage. If you're actually going to be computing things, you need to store it for later or even just temporarily. And there's a whole bunch of storage companies that are around. We'll talk a little bit about storage, but interestingly, none of these 8 companies are really in the storage space. Of course, some of the chip companies like TSMC provide chips for these storage companies. The third is networking. Today, we take it for granted that devices communicate with each other. They're networked, and it's an incredibly important element. Companies like Cisco Systems, for instance, grew up and became huge companies because of networking and what they did. But none of these 8 companies is specifically focused on networking. The fourth category is interface. These are the input devices and the output devices that allow us to communicate with each other and see things. So we all have a keyboard in front of us. We all have a display in front of us. Those are all interfaces. The keyboard is an input device. The display is an output device. Again, none of these 8 companies really are focused on interfaces. However, the 5th category is software. And 3 of these companies are profoundly in the software space. And that's the bottom 3 in this list: Microsoft, Google, and Facebook. And so you can build huge companies that are focused on software. You can build huge companies that are focused on compute. And over time, huge companies were created because of what they did in storage, networking, and to some extent, interfaces. So I've talked about 6 of these companies in the present. The 2 that are remaining are Amazon and Tesla. In a way, these 2 companies are just derivatives of what all the other technology companies have built. So whereas Apple, NVIDIA, and TSMC have built up on compute, Microsoft, Google, and Facebook have built up on software, Amazon and Tesla have built up on top of everything else. And basically, they're companies that work off of technology. So Amazon started as a commerce company, and now it actually offers a bunch of compute, storage, and networking for the world. Tesla has redefined automobiles, and we'll talk about the future of transportation in a moment. But as we look into these paths, I think that there's a very interesting story to be told here. The question is, why did any of these companies become the 8 of the top 10 largest companies in the world? And if we look into compute, we can probably find our answer. And this really has to do with Moore's law. Moore's law, well, it was named by Gordon Moore, and it basically says that every couple of years, the amount of transistors that we can print inside a chip can double. And as a consequence, the processing power can double, but at the same time, the cost can go down. And if you can grow this exponential technology, what you can do is you can increase power while decreasing prices year after year after year. And if you go back into history, there's really 120 years where Moore's law, even before Gordon Moore was born, has been upheld. From mechanical devices to devices that are built on vacuum tubes to the semiconductor era of integrated circuits. Year after year for 120 years, we have seen that the cost per calculation has gone down and down, and the number of calculations that can be taking place has gone up and up. And this is based on Moore's law and the advance of technology. And that's why your cell phone, which is an incredibly powerful computer in its own right, costs a few $100s, whereas that same compute power was not even available 50 years ago for millions and millions of dollars. And I guess just focusing on one chip in particular, Apple just announced and launched the M1 Max. This single processor has 57 billion transistors on it. And it's just an amazing accomplishment of technology that you're able to have a company that wasn't even in the semiconductor business that many years ago suddenly emerge in the semiconductor business to build one of the world's most incredible microprocessors. So as we look through compute and the history of compute, there's a history that walks from mainframes to mini computers, to personal computers, to client server, the World Wide Web of distributed computers, virtualization, which allows us to take one computer and split it into many pieces, and ultimately smartphones. And it's that one of those focuses should be on smartphones, where, again, I stress that is a computer. And so we all have computers on our desk, or most of us do, but most of us also have a smartphone in our pocket. So we have multiple computers that we use every day, not to mention all the small devices that are essentially computers themselves. And as we look at storage, we went from punch cards to magnetic tape to floppy drives to hard drives. There was a short era of CD-ROMs. Then we moved to solid state drives and what's called fiber channel inside the data center. Again, there's been a consistent march of more storage, much more cheaply, that allows access to our information wherever it might be. On the networking front, we had the internet that was started by our own government in the 1960s. And then we added in Ethernet for local networks, routers, which is what Cisco System built, firewalls to protect ourselves from bad sorts, Wi-Fi for our local home-based and business-based wireless networks. We've got advances in speed with optical networks. And of course, cellular data allows us to now have data over our phones, not just make phone calls, but actually receive information that comes over the data networks like web pages and texts. On the interface front, we'll bring back punch cards, but on the input side, we used to input information with punch cards, then keyboards. They added in the mouse, and then the smartphone added in touch. And some of our computers even have touch capability. On the output front, we started off with paper. We had lots of printers. And then we brought in video, of course, and audio. But these are areas where we interface with computers. And we'll talk in a moment about where all of these technologies are going for the next generation. And finally, on the software front, some of the biggest breakthroughs were operating systems, spreadsheets. The first one was VisiCalc, that redefined what we could do on a computer in an incredibly productive way. Email, which some of us love, some of us hate. I guess at certain times we both love and hate it. The point and click interface that was invented by Xerox, but commercialized by Apple. The browser, the Mosaic browser, developed at University of Illinois, that allowed us access to the web. Search engines is probably most popularized by Google. Peer-to-peer networks that allowed us to do things in a very distributed fashion. The first company in that space was Napster, that allowed us to, well, I would say exchange music, but perhaps steal is the right word. But many companies came after that to build out very robust peer-to-peer networks. And as we look at each of these different categories and companies, what we see is that there's been this ever-present march from one technology to the next to the next. And again, the capabilities have been enhanced each step of the way, but also the cost has come down every step of the way. And that's been absolutely critical. There's been almost no other industry where this has taken place, where both capability has increased and cost has decreased. If you think about the airline industry for a second, or the automobile industry, you see capabilities increasing, but you do not see costs decreasing. And if a computer were to follow that same trajectory where capabilities were increasing and costs not decreasing, we'd all be buying our smartphones these days for a couple $1 million. But of course, that's not the case. So technology has had the benefit of both increase in capabilities and the decrease in cost. And one of the other reasons for this, in addition to Moore's law, is what's called Metcalfe's law, which is the value and the power of a network. And Robert Metcalfe, who was in the networking industry, said something along the lines that the value of a network is exponentially proportionate to every member who joins that network. And basically that means that every individual who collaborates and communicates over a network adds value to all of us. Of course, look at the Tuesday Club here. Every incremental member is of value to the membership of a whole. And that's the value of networking. And that's the value that technology brings. So this is a little bit of history to talk about how we got to the present. And now we need to shift gears and see what are we working on in the present, and then how will those technologies of the present have an impact on the future. And by the way, I'm using a new technology myself for this presentation, so I'm going to have to keep moving myself around so you can see me. Hopefully this is working. So on the compute front, there are three primary future technologies that have emerged recently. And when I say recently, I use that term fairly loosely. Some of these technologies have been around for 5 years. Some of them, in fact, really aren't around yet. But I'll put them in the same category as present technology innovations. Number one is cloud computing. When you put together compute, storage, and networking, and you offer that as a service to anybody around the globe, from any location around the globe, that's cloud computing. You don't have to have a computer on your desk, or you can have a computer on your desk, but if you need more power, you can just pay for more power. You don't have to buy a huge computer. You don't have to pay for a computer in a data center. You just buy what you need when you need it on a variable cost basis. And that's cloud computing. And I talked about Amazon before. And again, most of us know it as an e-commerce company where you can buy books and shoes. But Amazon is the most recognizable cloud computing company in the world, where you can buy compute and you can buy storage and you can buy networking. It's fairly amazing how they've augmented their services from selling Beanie Babies all the way to selling compute power, storage, and networking. The second current innovation is called the Internet of Things. As I was mentioning, semiconductor prices come down incredibly low every year, and the power keeps going up. And the question that a bunch of people ask is, well, what if everything had a semiconductor in it? What if everything had processing power? What if everything had some storage and networking associated with it? What would that lead to? And you're seeing more and more this Internet of Things, the connection of every object and device in the world, so that we're better informed and we can take advantages of services no matter where they're located. And this capability takes place because of the low cost of semiconductors and the low cost of electronics. Now, there's also a flip side to this, of course, that if everything is connected, then what happens to our privacy? What happens to security? And we'll talk about some of these issues a little bit later on. But suffice it to say that the Internet of Things is a big trend where your refrigerator will be connected to the internet. Your television is connected to the internet. Your vacuum cleaner will be connected to the internet. Pretty much everything will be. And we'll take advantage of that for all sorts of interesting and useful purposes. The third category of compute in terms of present innovations is quantum computing. And this is one of the areas where we're not yet there yet. So you can't run down to your store and get a quantum computer. But the question is, what is a quantum computer? It's basically a completely different computer technology that takes advantage of what happens at the atomic level or at the quantum level, which with something called quantum entanglement. And I won't go into the specifics of how this actually works, but what I can tell you is that by taking advantage of this phenomenon called quantum entanglement, your computer can actually calculate an infinite number of calculations instantaneously. It's almost magical. In fact, to a lot of folks, it is magical. And you can't use, or we don't believe you can use quantum computers for standard tasks. It's not like you could say, oh, I could do my taxes instantaneously, or I could write a paper instantaneously, or play a game instantaneously. No. But there are a number of applications where the ability to instantaneously compute an infinite number of calculations comes in handy. And we'll talk about this a bit later. This comes very handy in the area of biology and medicine, where billions and billions, and I'm selling it short, but billions of calculations have to take place in order to generate or derive next generation molecules. So quantum computing is coming about. Its applications will be different than standard computers, but it will open up a whole new era of discovery in areas that we've been limited in the past. Moving on to networking, the next generation technology that I believe many of us have heard about is 5G. There's been many commercials by AT&T and Verizon talking about their 5G networks and how fast and how great they are. And candidly, it's more marketing than it is reality just yet, but the reality is coming around. But the reality that will come around is our ability to communicate wirelessly at the speeds we're accustomed to at home or the speeds we're accustomed to at work. And this really puts mobile devices on par with connected devices. And it really is going to usher in, again, a new era of connectivity and capability, because speed, while always an issue, we always want things faster, we always want things cheaper, but speed will come about wherever we are and whenever we are. And by the way, you'll probably note, I don't have a technology or a present technology in the storage space. It's not that I'm skipping over innovations in storage, and it's not that there's no innovations in storage. It's just that there weren't any pivotal innovations in storage. Storage continues to be better and cheaper over time, but I guess it didn't make my top 10 list. So we're not talking about it. Moving on to interface technologies, there are a number of innovations that are coming around that'll be really fascinating as they get built out. Starting with two output technologies. One is augmented reality and the other is virtual reality. I suspect you've heard of virtual reality, but you may not have heard quite as much about augmented reality. What augmented reality is a technology that augments your reality or adds to it rather than takes you away from it. Virtual reality is where you're taken away from your reality into another world, like a metaverse, or where you put on goggles and you see something very different and you block out your reality. In augmented reality, you're still within your worldly environment and you're augmented with things that might be displayed in glasses or even just your cell phone that projects information over the scenery in front of you. So for instance, you could go, I'll make this up here, but bird watching, and you see a bird in a tree and you point your phone at that bird and the phone overlays the name of the bird and some statistics and information about the bird. Or you're wearing glasses that have clear lenses, but yet you can see an overlay of text and video, and you see a video about that bird or more information about the bird. But you're in reality, you're living life, but you also see information that is augmenting your experience. That's augmented reality. And as I was mentioning with virtual reality, that's where you're taking yourself out of reality and immersing yourself completely into a new environment. And there's many new applications for that that are extremely beneficial. We've seen the dystopian future described in many books, like Ready Player One, where the populace is escaping their environment by going into a virtual reality metaverse. And that's kind of the negative of virtual reality. But on the positive front, we could have like next generation surgery, where a physician, rather than getting shrunk and then floated inside the body, like the Fantastic Voyage, is merely sitting at his or her desk, puts on virtual reality goggles, and sees inside the body while some kind of robotic surgical instrument and tool is inside the body doing the work for that physician. That physician has taken themselves out of reality and put themselves inside a body so that they can see what's going on and manipulate things with extreme precision and extreme focus because they've taken a new reality on as a consequence of VR. That's a very positive application of virtual reality. Moving on to voice control, that's an input mechanism for technology. And we already see that. I believe probably many of you send text messages or emails by simply speaking to your phone or speaking into your computer and using the dictation that transcribes your voice into text. That's a very useful technology, and we're going to see more and more voice technology be released. I should add to that the Amazon Echo, the devices like the Google Home, where you can just ask your device, answers to trivia questions, or what's the weather, what's the latest news. There's all sorts of applications for voice control. Doesn't work quite so well if you're in the subway or you're in a crowded room, but that's why we have other mechanisms for inputting information. But when we're by ourselves or with a small group or in a car, voice control is a great way to go. And we're going to see that really enhance the world around us because it allows us to interact with technology without taking our hands away from what we're doing or our eyes off of what we're doing. Now we're going to move on to software and the three innovations that are being developed currently. And again, I'll stress, this is only a top 10 list. There are hundreds and hundreds of innovations being pursued. But again, these are the ones that I chose. So number one on this list is artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence has been something that's been in development for decades. But it has just been recent when artificial intelligence has taken a real big leap forward. And that's because of the innovations around what's called deep learning, where you build out a model that is incredibly broad and has a capability of learning things like human beings at many, many different levels. And the reason we're able to pursue deep learning today, where we couldn't really 10 years ago, is that it takes a lot of computational power. So artificial intelligence has really made this leap forward because of the leap forward in compute. Because processing power is so available, so accessible, and so powerful, we can now carry out artificial intelligence at a relatively cost-effective basis. And what is artificial intelligence? It's basically a computer's ability to learn. Now, it shouldn't be mistaken for human intelligence. And in fact, I think I accidentally slipped and said that a minute ago. Artificial intelligence is not human intelligence in the way that our brains think. It does not mimic our brain function. But what it does is it allows us to mimic some part of our capabilities as humans by being able to learn. And this learning is presenting itself in many different applications, and self-driving cars are coming around. There's a lot of artificial intelligence in those. And in fact, artificial intelligence is showing up really everywhere because it's a way to teach computers or allow computers to teach themselves how to do certain things. We've even seen it show up in gaming. There's a game called Go that is played around the globe, but primarily in Asia. And an artificial intelligence agent just beat the grandmaster of Go. And that in itself was an incredible accomplishment, but there was something even more extraordinary about that accomplishment, in that the way that the computer beat the champion was not by mimicking the champion, but by introducing strategies that were never played before in the world of Go. So the computer was not only able to learn Go and learn the patterns of experts, but it was able to discover new patterns and new strategies. And that is truly a great example of how artificial intelligence can work and discover new things, not just mimic what humans do. And in fact, up to this point in time, before artificial intelligence, computers could only do things that humans told it to do. But with artificial intelligence, computers can go beyond that. And of course, this brings up some very interesting ethical and moral issues. How far do you let computers go? How far should they go in terms of their learning and being independent? What kind of controls do you put on computers? And we'll talk about this a bit as I talk about the future. But these are very important things to think about because we're developing technologies that are incredibly powerful. And those new powerful technologies allow us to create other new powerful technologies. Again, technology grows and marches forward exponentially. And the things that we see today are going to be just mere small incremental steps compared to where we'll be in just 5 years. It moves very fast. The next software innovation is blockchain. And blockchain, you may not have heard of, or may have heard of a little bit, but it's at the foundation of cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, which you probably have heard of. What blockchain is it's a new type of ledger or database. It's a record. And it's a very secure record. It's an indelible record that doesn't go away. And it's a distributed record that cannot be altered. And that's why it's at the foundation of cryptocurrencies. That's why Bitcoin was able to launch, and for, well, now quite a few individuals have faith in that currency, because the information behind Bitcoin is stored on this indelible ledger called a blockchain. And while cryptocurrencies are still emerging and their future is still undecided, I don't see any fear, if you will, in this underlying technology of blockchain. I see incredible opportunity here, because what blockchain enables us to do is to store information securely and as I mentioned, indelibly, so that we have trust in whatever is stored on the blockchain. And that's incredibly important. So while there have been flaws with cryptocurrencies, there have not been flaws with the blockchain. And that's important to recognize. And what the blockchain has enabled is not just cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, but it's also enabled things called NFTs. And I suspect a few of you have heard of NFTs, non-fungible tokens. It's a way of being able to sell a digital good to an individual and allow them to claim ownership to it forever. And so we've seen an incredible market arise where trivial and whimsical images have sold for millions of dollars. And while, again, that market is suspect, and it is more of a, the hype of the tulip craze from the past, the underlying technology is blockchain, and that's very real and enables these markets to exist, these new markets to emerge with confidence. And these markets are not controlled by a government. They're not controlled by a central authority. They're essentially controlled by a distributed authority. And this has led to the emergence of something called a DAO, or a DOA. Sorry, DAO. Don't want to see DOA. DAO, a decentralized, autonomous organization. And so what that means is that organizations are appearing, if you will, kind of corporations or governments or clubs. The Tuesday Club can be a DAO, but basically organizations can put up their charter and run themselves on the blockchain. And you can have a truly distributed organization with a distributed management system and rules that get followed in a distributed fashion in a very fascinating way. And I won't go into detail, but it is a new form of government, if you will, that can be self-organizing, self-healing, and self-disassembling if it wants to. But it can exist on the blockchain. And again, that's a way to hold information in a secure fashion with a set of rules that everybody can agree to and follow or get off, if you will. Anyway, there's a lot of uses of the blockchain. It's a fundamental technology that will underpin many of our future businesses and relationships. Finally, at the very bottom, I'm putting up another future technology that is to some extent here today, but really has a much grander and greater future, and that's synthetic biology. And in synthetic biology, we see the ability to create biological molecules and compounds, and perhaps, and I should say for sure, organisms that are synthetically created. Basically, instead of using a standard programming language, you're using the language of life, the language of DNA, to create molecules, pharmaceuticals, and other items that are biologically based, but doing this synthetically. And it doesn't have to be a living entity. It can also be a non-living entity that is being created by biological means. And it's a really fascinating manufacturing platform if you think about it. Our bodies are probably the most incredible manufacturing platform. Our ability to grow from a cell to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 and forward into trillions of cells. That's pretty remarkable. And leveraging that manufacturing platform to create things, to create food, to create fuel, to create polymers, really affords us with the ability to expand our ability to create and invent. And it's probably not lost on you that synthetic biology will probably be aided quite a bit by quantum computing. Because as I mentioned earlier, quantum computing does a phenomenal job in certain domains, and one of those domains is biology. And so for sure, synthetic biology will be aided by the advance of computational capabilities in quantum computing. So that's my top 10 list. 3 new compute technologies, 1 new network technology, 3 interface technologies, and 3 software technologies. And what I'm going to do for the last few minutes is kind of run down a few industries and how these technologies are going to impact those industries. And so this will be the future. And if I am adept, I'm going to move my face over. Hello. And we'll talk about the future. So the future of transportation is one, as I mentioned before with Tesla, that is going to be ripe with innovation. And Tesla did not revolutionize anything per se. Tesla really evolutionized in the transportation business. It took what was out there and just made a better car. And we see the same thing in other forms of transportation. We're going to need cleaner transportation, obviously more fuel efficient, lower cost. All of these technologies are going to impact transportation significantly. And of course, one form of transportation that's emerging is space. I'm sure everybody has seen the consumer travel into space being a thing now. And that's absolutely going to be fun to watch. I'm not sure I have any interest in personally inhabiting Mars. I think if I went out to my balcony on the Martian landscape, it just wouldn't look very interesting to me. But for some people, that's going to be fascinating. We'll see where they go. And perhaps it's not surprising that Elon Musk has not only innovated in transportation, but also space. And in fact, Elon is one of these incredible individuals who is probably going to end up innovating in many, many dimensions here. But he's not the only one. There's a lot of entrepreneurs out there pursuing this grand future. Robotics is another area that's going to impact us in phenomenal ways. Robotics is going to impact medicine. It's going to impact the manufacturing world, of course, and it already does. And it's going to impact the consumer world. We're going to see more and more consumer robots, not too dissimilar to what we see in Star Wars and what we were introduced to in that series in the not too distant future, if not already today. I've mentioned healthcare multiple times. Of course, healthcare continues to innovate. And this is a very, very exciting field because obviously it impacts us all. While perhaps only a few of us, perhaps none of us will go into space, every one of us will take advantage of our healthcare system, and pretty often. But the innovations there are impacted by technology. And I go back to robotics and surgical robotics, which is doing amazing, amazing things and allowing surgeries that used to require the opening of an individual to be minimally invasive or non-invasive. It's really fantastic what we're doing on this front. Manufacturing, of course, is being impacted. We're looking for lower cost manufacturing, automated manufacturing. We used to manufacture most of our things in Asia. As the standard of living grows in Asia, manufacturing is becoming more expensive there. And so looking for alternative manufacturing arenas is going to be very important. The creator economy is a whole new economy that's sprung up over the last 10 years. These are individuals making things from their homes and selling them, typically via the internet or via local markets. Many of you probably saw masks being sold, made and sold by your neighbors, or crafts being sold, made and sold. There's a website called Etsy that is all focused on the creator economy. And this is made possible by innovations in manufacturing, things like bringing a 3D printer into your house. Those are technologies and tools that were not available to a common consumer 10 years ago, and now they're fairly common. There is a future in social networks for sure. And this probably demands more than just a few minutes discussion, but what we've seen with the social networks over the last 15, 20 years is both positive and negative. Social networks bring us together and they also drive us apart. And one of the most prescient lessons of the social network is that communicating over a flat medium, like a social network, doesn't allow us to express ourselves in the full splendor of a face-to-face conversation. And as a consequence of this flattening of conversation, we lose nuance and we end up disagreeing much more often. And you can see this in any domain in the social space, whether it's Facebook or TikTok, or even a local service like Nextdoor. We end up disagreeing with each other more often because we don't have facial expressions. We don't have the ability to communicate and debate and discuss. And that's problematic. And we've seen this impact our politics as well. And as we talk about and think about government, we've obviously seen a big impact that technology has had on government. And again, for good and for bad. The social networks and the way they're constructed and the biases that are built therein have had a negative influence on government. But at the same time, some of these technologies allow for greater participation. And that's very promising. The more that we all participate in government and are active, the more that we care. And the more we care about each other. And that'll be a great benefit going forward. Of course, we talked a bit about banking, and the government has a big influence on banking. But as I mentioned, with the blockchain emerging, there's going to be some changes, or at least some augmentations to our banking platform. And what's called decentralized finance, it's the use of cryptocurrencies and crypto tokens on the blockchain to enable other types of financial transactions that are not under the control of any centralized government. And that's going to have an impact on all of us, and also going to have an impact on government and what it means to be a government and what governments can control. Government also controls much of our educational system. And while we all grew up in a government educational system, we've seen over the past 10 and 20 years a true revolution in education, where you can get educated online in any topic at any time. Even this talk that I'm giving today and the talks that you're holding over Zoom are just phenomenal ways to participate in lifelong learning. That's education. That is what we all have taken control of as individuals and groups, our own education. And it's a wonderful thing. And technology enables that to take place. The workplace is changing. We saw it before the pandemic, where we saw the creation of a gig economy or gig workers. These are individuals who don't work for a specific company, but they work for Uber and they work for Lyft and they work for DoorDash. They could have 5 jobs at a time doing multiple things for multiple people, all part of this gig economy. So you don't have to hold down a traditional job. You can work many jobs out of your home or out of your car and make a real living out of it, or sell things on eBay, or make a life as an influencer on Facebook and TikTok and Instagram. The Kardashians created an empire, creating their own popularity on a new platform. So work has changed, though, also because of the pandemic, and the whole notion of hybrid work is part of our life now. Many companies will not go back to the way that life was before the pandemic, now that we've seen how we can work at home, at least part of the time. So I think there's a lot of changes in just simply the working world. I have to mention climate, and I'm definitely not going to give it its due, but there certainly is a tremendous challenge that we have with our climate right now, and to no small part because of technology. Certainly this started out in the Industrial Revolution, but it has grown to epic proportions because of the impact on our environment. And technology can have a role in reversing that, as well as, of course, it has had a role in creating it. And we need to be on our game in order to make sure that we apply technology to reverse the effects of climate change. We don't want to create our own destruction as we advance on other fronts. We can't lose sight of the climate. Security is the last of the two items that I'm going to talk about. And I suspect that many of us have had incidents where our security was made vulnerable, or our security was penetrated. Myself, recently, I was the victim of identity fraud. Someone had gained access to many of my personal information items: my birthday, my social security number, my phone number, my address. It is scary. And of course, technology enables this to happen much more easily because our information is out there. On the flip side, I was also able to shut down the individual or individuals who were taking my identity and using it. I was able to shut them down pretty quickly. And I use technology to do that too. So technology can be used for good and bad. And there's just no way around that. You know, perhaps some people can say you want to stop technology because there are all the bad things that could take place. But the reality is it will move on. It will march forward no matter what. And so the real clarion call here is to leverage technology for good, to counteract the things that happen that are not in our best interest or not in the interest of national security. But in terms of personal security and national security, we can leverage technology for the better, but recognize that indeed there will be individuals and groups out there that will use it for nefarious purposes. And finally, to go to the most abstract item in the future, and probably a good place to finish up with, I want to talk about truth. And again, this is a topic I could talk quite a bit about. But one of the victims of technology, as we're seeing, is the truth. With technology, you can create anything, and you can make that thing you create look real. Whether you're using Photoshop to add or subtract people and items from a photo, whether you're creating a video where you can add or subtract items, an audio recording. You can create fake, false media content very easily. It's in the hands of consumers today. And at the same time, because we've created the ability to falsify information, we have also jeopardized the actual truth. We've made it easier to cast doubt on that which is real. And this is going to make the future very challenging. We won't know who's done what or who to give credit to, or it'll be very difficult to do so. But back to what I was saying before, there are two sides to every coin. There's two sides to technology. There's always a good side and a bad side. And the good side here is we can leverage technology to ultimately determine indisputably what the truth is. And this is where I turn back to what I was talking about before with blockchain, where blockchain provides, again, a ledger that is distributed, indisputable, and unchangeable. And so it possibly, and I'm not going to say definitively because nothing's definitive these days, but possibly could be part of the solution for maintaining the truth. And other technologies can appear to help us define what the truth is. But I did want to put out that truth is under fire. And it's a very important thing for all of us to think about as technology advances and creates more opportunities for false information to be spread and true information to be debunked. And of course, as we all know, this is not new. Truth has been debunked for centuries, and false information has been promoted for centuries. It's just that it's much easier to do so these days. So that's the end of my planned and prepared comments, and I'll keep up my top 10 of technologies and my categories of the future. I guess I'll say in parting words before turning to questions here that there are many more areas to talk about in the future. We could have talked about economics, for instance. We could have talked about military, etc. There's many more things we could talk about, but I put down these 14 categories because I thought there's a number of things that we could discuss about them in particular. And the same comment I'll make about these technologies. There's much more than top 10 technologies, but these are the top 10 to focus on and keep this talk relatively focused. But in the final analysis, I just have to say that I am optimistic about the future. And even given that we can have two sides to all technologies, for good and for bad, and of course, everywhere in between, ultimately, it is my intuition that technology for good will always dominate and supersede technology for bad and make our lives much better. And with that, I will conclude. And I think that the next step is to take any questions from the live audience, and then we'll move to questions that were thrown up in the chat. And you can feel free to add questions into the chat as we proceed.
Thank you, Warren. That was wonderful. A great look. I think what we're going to do is go to the auditorium. And is Bill there? Are there questions from the audience before we turn to the Zoom audience?
Yes.
Bill?
What is the future of the battery technologies?
I believe the question was, what is the future of battery technologies? Great question. Battery technologies have been one of those technologies that's slowly and steadily progressed. There's been a lot of attention on battery technology over the last, well, actually probably 20 years or so, because so many of our devices are portable and powered by batteries. So it first started off with a desire to drive up capability in our computers and smartphones. But then with the release of electric vehicles and other electric transportation, it's become even more important. I've been involved with some battery technology companies creating new materials for anodes and cathodes. And I've been disappointed by how long it's taken to commercialize some of these technologies. But at the same time, I can see them on the horizon and coming, where we're going to be able to create new battery technologies that have higher density, charge faster, and provide greater power overall. And, there's technologies, not just chemical batteries, but, I guess in the line of chemical batteries, there'd be like hydrogen cells, fuel cells, and also even nuclear technologies. And while there's been a lot of concern over nuclear technologies, and for good reasons, because of some of the failure modes, there is no debate that from a climate perspective, assuming we can make them safe, there's significant advantages to both fission and fusion that I believe we'll see that add to our repertoire of powering devices, no matter what they might be. So I look for, again, a good future there. It's a slower march than the march that we've seen with compute and network and storage, but it's a march forward nonetheless.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Thank you for an excellent talk. I have two questions. One is, could you discuss the problem of blockchain or Bitcoin is its huge energy consumption. On the one hand, we say that it's got all this great capability, but it's got huge downside. And the second one is you just touched on it, the question of fusion, which had been an energy source which people searched for or sought forever, not too successfully. Do you see this huge advance in computing power as part of the key to unlocking the fusion as a source of clean energy?
Wow, great questions also. Starting with the first one in terms of the issue with power consumption and blockchain, that's a great question. So without getting into too much detail, the way that the blockchain works to prove authenticity and other attributes is through a technique called proof of work. And this proof of work mechanism takes a lot of computer cycles. And when you apply a lot of computer cycles to something, it takes a lot of energy. And so it is absolutely true that transactions that take place on the blockchain today are not at all energy efficient. And it's kind of a funny thing to say, because you're like, wait, it's just a transaction. Why should it take any energy? Well, again, based on the blockchain and use of this proof of work technique, it does use a lot of energy. The good news is that there are new techniques that are being developed and promoted that work as well as proof of work, but don't require the energy that proof of work has demonstrated. And so what we'll see very soon, and as soon as even rolling out today and over the next year or two, is new blockchains that have a better basis for maintaining their authenticity and maintaining their very being, if you will. Those will lower the energy consumption. Those will allow for microtransactions to take place and get us out of this issue of using too much energy to perform basic transactions. And it's interesting, it gets back to that Danny Hillis quote, blockchain is still technology. It's not perfect. We're going to learn along the way and make improvements, and that's one of them. Your second question was about fusion. I am no expert on fusion. Actually, I'm no expert on any of these topics. Perhaps I'm a little less of an expert on fusion. However, again, my intuition is that the enhancements in technology, computational capabilities, enhancements in manufacturing, enhancements in new material creation, development, will all benefit the enhancements and advance in nuclear fusion, and that this will be a reality. It's again, if you look at, there's a futurist named Ray Kurzweil, and he says, if you look into the future, we always underestimate where we're going to be down the road. We can't, because it's exponential, we think we know where we're going to be in 10 years, but if you look back 10 years and you see all the advances over the past 10 years, it's flabbergasting how much we've done, and we never could have predicted it. So I predict nuclear fusion in the next 10 years. And that's going to be one of the keys in terms of improving our climate dramatically. And by the way, and add another thing about the climate, I've already identified in my research some technologies that sequester CO2 in huge quantities. There's even a company that can pull CO2 out of our atmosphere and convert it into fuel. So the typically we use fuel to drive transport, which adds to the CO2 around us. Well, here's a company that pulls the CO2 back out and feeds it back in as fuel. So it reduces reliability and dependence on fossil fuels, and at the same time, reduces the CO2 in our ambient atmosphere. So we're going to discover things that really create a great climate in the future. It's going to take a little time, but really just a little time.
A very personal question. Is there any way we could watch this again at home on our own technologies, systems, or other people could see this? We're not here today, or we're not watching.
Yeah, this is being recorded now and will be distributed to cable television. And possibly we could even create a DVD as we have in the past. But yes, there will be a chance for other people to see.
Can we move to the questions from the Zoom audience?
Right. I think that takes care of the local audience.
Great. Okay, I'm going to open up the chat here. And let's see here. How concerned are you about the internet, especially social media's ability to pull together like-minded individuals who so easily can do bad things? In the past, these individuals were loners, more shunned than celebrated, and could do less harm than they can as a group. Yeah, and that's from Ron. Thanks, Ron. I am very concerned. I did spend a little bit of time talking about social media and how it flattens our personalities. But to your question, there are individuals who have sought to do bad and not participate with the same ethics and morals and cultural values that the rest of us have. And they can leverage technology to further their whatever cause they have or whatever personality issues they have. I am concerned. Bullying on the internet has grown, and individuals can hide behind anonymous personas and avatars and wreak havoc in the lives of others. And it's very sad. I don't have a direct answer for, what we can do about that specifically, but I do believe, again, that there are ways that technology can work for benefit. And to a big extent, these individuals could use some help, counseling, therapy. And there are many startup companies now that have sprung up, especially around the pandemic, where the need has become so clear for psychological support. And these companies have emerged that have provided it on an outsourced basis and can provide individuals with help. And I think that will go a long way. We all need life coaches. We all need our personal board of directors. And whether that's loved ones who we live with or who are around us, or even just a therapist, those are all sources that we can get to now because of the ability to meet with people remotely. So I hope the social networks can control themselves, and I hope some of these services can emerge to help others. Second question here, will quantum computing and who we are as individuals merge so we will in effect become a version of eternal? Are we ready for anything like that? Google almost owns us now. That's a very interesting question too. Well, actually, there's a couple points in there. So the first question about quantum computing and individuals merging to become eternal versions, that is already happening. And it's happening not with quantum computing, but with artificial intelligence and deep learning. We're able to resurrect individuals and have conversations with individuals who no longer exist. We've seen this in the movies. Princess Leia has come back. Other actors and actresses have come back. You can have conversations with Darwin and Plato. These are AI characters, and they're not human, of course, but they're getting closer and closer to behaving like humans. And in a way, we do become eternal. And I think it brings up some interesting questions. Do we want to be eternal? Or is there some value in being eternal? Should we impose some limitations on being eternal? Certainly not for me to answer, but I think they're very interesting questions because the technology is definitely enabling that. And the last comment was Google almost owns us now. Yeah, this gets back to our privacy and our security. And companies will come and go. And Google, or Alphabet is now called, it's not forever. But certainly we have participated as much as Google has in this ownership. We've given our data over to Google, we've given our data over to Facebook, and they've used it. But they're still businesses and they have to meet consumer demand. And if they overstep their bounds, and they buy, for sure they have already in certain areas, but as they overstep their bounds, they will hear about it and there will be pushback and they will have to make changes, or consumers will vote elsewhere. And I think this is part of the democratization of technology. It allows us to pick up and leave in mass if we need to. Let's see. Oh, I see there's, let's see. There's a thank you. You're welcome. Another question here. What's the risk that technology is far exceeding our abilities to use it responsibly? Are we putting a howitzer in the hands of children? At the risk of going over ground I've already gone over, there's absolutely a risk. And I'll make a short answer and say, technology is also a solution for that. And the solution really is embodied in all of us as human beings. As human beings, we have a passion for each other. The more remote we are, the less passion I would say we have, but we still do have passion. You can see that when in times of strife, when a fire breaks out here in California and neighbors are helping neighbors and strangers are helping strangers, when a flood takes place in the Midwest, when a hurricane hits on the East Coast and in South, the best comes out in people, and that's our natural inclination. So I see our natural inclination to rise to the occasion and put technology to good use, and especially to leverage technology to mitigate the bad. Let's see. There's a question about blockchain and energy. We just talked about that. What are the most significant risks of these technological advances? One that I haven't talked about in terms of advances is the ultimate advance of artificial intelligence into what's called generalized artificial intelligence. And there's a debate about what will happen when artificial intelligence is more intelligent than human beings and what it will take to get there. There is a group of thought, or a school of thought, I should say, that suggests that it will take a very, very large and sophisticated computer to hit that mark, and that there will only be a few of these computers in the world, and that those who control those computers will control everything. And that's a pretty dystopian view of the future. I think that's a significant risk, that if there is this one ultimate technology, when it first gets discovered, it will only be in the hands of one group, one person, and perhaps it could be used for bad. I hope that's not the case. Hard to see how that will play out. But again, I'm more optimistic than not. Here's a question: is the Silicon Valley community attempting any collective effort to restrain or change the hateful platform of social media? Or the Silicon community, I shouldn't say, I added the word Valley. Yeah, I think we all are attempting to restrain and change social media. We can already see that. Whistleblowers coming out about Facebook, collective efforts on the parts of certain groups, organizations, to rally on behalf of other groups. And what about tech? Yeah, we definitely talk about it in the technology community. And the question is whether we talk about it enough and are doing enough or not. And it's certainly is to be determined. Here's a question: how are we doing against China and AI, military, and other technologies? Great question. The number 11 company on that list of the top 10 largest companies, the one that just missed the cut, is a company called Tencent. And that is a media/technology company out of China. They and others in China are doing very, very well when it comes to artificial intelligence. So is the rest of the world as well. But China certainly is not a technology backwater by any stretch. Where I'm hopeful with respect to China, and this hope has been debunked a bit recently, but I still remain hopeful that China embraces capitalism so much to the point where they can't leave the world market. And they've gone very far in embracing capitalism. And, with their leadership saying that, to some extent that financial success is good and beneficial. And we've seen many, many examples of successful global companies coming out of China. Capitalism demands markets, markets demand populations, those markets demand customers. They can't do it alone. So an isolationist strategy will cause their economy to fail. An open strategy will cause their economy to thrive. And I hope that is the dominant form of economy that they embrace going forward. It certainly is possible, but they have probably some growth pains to go through. Let's see. There's a company about battery technologies, and we talked about battery technologies. Let's see. I'll one final question here right at the end. Your notion that technology holds the key to dealing with the risks of technology. I'm a psychologist. I see the key is human behavior. We need folks to see and care about the risks and then perhaps develop the technology as well as the laws, et cetera, to deal with it. This is a great comment to end on. I could not agree more. I have said that technology holds the key to dealing with the risks of technology. Very true. But we hold, as individuals, the key to developing technology. And so there will be no technology developed without us. And one could question that with the growth in artificial intelligence, but I'll still maintain technology advances because of us as individuals, as groups, as a society, and our creativity. And so as a psychologist, that discipline has always been valuable, but is even more valuable today because of how much impact we as individuals can have on our communities, on our nations, and on the world at large. And so my optimism is fueled by the capabilities of technology, but really underpinning that is fueled by the promise of humanity, of our ability to put good above bad, good above evil, and have great moral and ethical compass to guide us to doing the right things as we move forward. And with that, I will say thank you very much for the forum, for the time. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Warren. That was great.